have Noah Sumpter with Alpha Solutions with me. You know, we've been talking about, part of the name is wealth, and as we get older, there's some definite wealth strategies that we can employ, and so I decided to bring in a bit of an expert. Uh, Noah here, he's been helping me the last several months with annuities and annuity strategies, and I thought maybe he might be able to share a little bit more about annuities, how they can help, when they're the right solution, when they're not the right solution, and what you should be looking for. So, Noah, how are you this morning?
Doing pretty good. Pretty good, man. It's afternoon, but I'm cold up here in Michigan. I think we're supposed to get about a foot of snow here by Thursday morning. So that's just another day for us. But other than that, man, it's been a busy start to the year. So I cannot complain at all. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you could make it on. So I know earlier we had talked about, I've got several clients that talk about how, and I don't know about annuities, and I've heard some things, and I know how I discuss those and how I handle them, but you do this all day, every day. So I thought maybe I'd have you talk about,
Yeah.
some of the
Some of the
some of
common
the
mis
pros and cons. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good place to start too with the annuities because a lot of people, whether it was missold to them in the past or they thought they were buying this, it turned out to be something else, or there's features, fees included in products that aren't fully disclosed or not fully understood when you purchase it. There is a lot of misconceptions when it comes to annuities. And I would say that's the first major misconception is fees. Now, if you go to a financial advisor, somebody who typically sells more aggressive investments like stocks, bonds, things like that, there's always going to be some sort of fee associated with managing your money. And the same applies to variable annuities, which that's usually what people are thinking of when they think about the fees and all of the extra stuff that people tend to not like about
Yeah.
annuities. Another thing is you could lose if the index or whatever strategy you're in loses value, then you can lose value, and then on top of that, you're going to have to pay a fee. So that is probably the biggest, most common thing I hear about people not wanting to purchase an annuity is they're fee heavy. Now, all we're going to talk about are fixed annuities, which unless you add certain riders, which that's really where you're really getting to the weeds with it, most of these products are not going to have a fee included. But that's definitely the first thing you hear are people, not wanting to, they don't want to pay 2-3% fees. And on top of that, risk losing their money in what they thought was supposed to be a safer investment versus just investing in stocks, or something more aggressive like that. And the other, not really a misconception you hear with annuities, but just the biggest objection is typically the length of time you have to keep the money in there. Most of the products with the better rates, they are going to be on a 7 to 10 year chassis, but that's where it's also up to the agent or advisor, whoever you're talking to about your annuity. It's up to them to make sure that you are a good fit for this and that you have sufficient funds and income elsewhere to supplement whatever your daily, monthly, annual needs are, to make sure you're actually suitable to purchase this annuity because a lot of people aren't.
At 100%. So speaking of that, I kind of hit on it a little bit, but I just want to clarify for our audience. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, Noah. One of the biggest advantages of owning annuity or purchasing an annuity versus other types of investment is the lack of risk of principal, right? I won't say you don't totally lack risk because opportunity cost and that kind of thing would be
Yep.
considered risks nonetheless. But at the end of the day, if I've got $100,000 and I'm 70 years old and that's my nest egg, I can't afford to lose any of that money.
Exactly.
And with an annuity, I'm not going to lose money. I may not gain as much as I potentially could with some of these other options, but I have no real downside. Worst case, the market tanks, everything goes to pot, and I've still got absolute worst case, I still have my $100,000.
Yep.
You know, best case, I've made some money along the way, but worst case, at the end of the day, I still have my $100,000.
Yep. No,
Wouldn't,
that's absolutely correct. And that, again, that's where you have to be sure about the type of annuity you're purchasing, because there are variable annuities where the 100,000 you put in, it can vary, it could go up, it could go down depending on whatever the market's doing. But
and
with
that's
fixed,
without the fees.
exactly, and it's again, that's where it's hard to, did it get missold, or did you not just really understand what he's trying to tell you? That's where you really need to make sure you're on the same page with the person you're talking to about your investments, and that you thoroughly understand what you're purchasing and don't always just take what they tell you at face value. Sometimes you do need to do your own research and just make sure they're, again, somebody that you can trust to invest your nest egg for you or to give you a recommendation on what to do with it. But when it comes to fixed and fixed indexed annuities, that is kind of included in that term fixed. Whatever you put in there, that's probably the main benefit outside of tax deferral of an annuity is if you put your money in there, it's not, no matter, like you said, no matter what the market does, the market could crash because Trump says this, or we're going to go to war with somebody, market tanks, because your value is fixed when you put it in there. They are going to protect you on the downside. So worst case, you put your 100,000 in, market's down for the next X amount of years, depending on how long your annuity is. Worst case, you'll still have your 100,000. And most of them will have some sort of minimum guaranteed rate included with it.
Yes.
To where if you earn zero interest over that 10 years, they will credit you some sort of interest in return for that. And again, that's very product specific. I don't really want to get too in depth on that, but
Right.
most of them will have some sort of minimum guaranteed interest earned on it. And you hit what the trade-off is. Could you
Absolutely.
do better in the market? Absolutely. But that's where
Maybe.
it's, yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe. But I mean, you really
Right.
do have more,
Potentially.
you do have more upside going and buying stock. You do have more upside with that, but that's exactly what you said. If you're 70, can you afford to leave all of your money at risk? If you want to work for 40 more years, sure.
Right.
But if, but if you want to retire and count on that money being there, and I would say more importantly, count on having that money and turning it into income down the road, then no, you cannot afford to lose it. So that's
Right.
definitely the main objective of purchasing a fixed or fixed indexed annuity is the downside protection. And that's how they should be sold, is just an alternative to going into the market. You don't have as much upside. You could do better in an annuity, but again, it's all dependent on, that's where you really start to get more in depth with product features.
So, so we've kind of talked about age here and also like the security benefit and when might be a good time. It seems like Warren Buffett said something to the effect of, and I'm going to paraphrase here, uh, there's a rule of 100, and
Mhm.
that as you get older, you want less exposure to the market volatility, right? And that rules, if I remember right, is you take your age minus 100, and that should be the amount of exposure you have to the market.
Yep.
So the older we get, the closer we get to that 100, that lower percentage we should have in a riskier, more volatile investment. So,
Exactly.
we use our 70-year-old gentleman in this case. They should only have 30% tops in the market. Why? Because, well, the market could lose everything at any given time. And therefore, that still leaves you 70% of your investments
Yep.
safe.
Yep.
Right. So then, when is a good time to get into annuities, and kind of what would be the ideal, most suitable client?
Definitely. So typically the most common situation you'll see is somebody who is usually in their 60s or 70s. Everybody's situation is different. Some people maybe save more, retire a little bit earlier in their 60s. Some people are going to work to their late 70s, 80s. But the most common situation you see is that 401k or that IRA, whatever retirement account you've gotten, and you built that nest egg up over your 30, 40 years of working. Okay, I'm approaching retirement within the next few years. You typically don't want to wait until you retire. A lot of people do, and you can do that. You know what I mean? It could work out better. It could work out worse. It just depends on what the market
Right.
does in the meantime. But ideally, you're having that conversation 3 to 5 years before you're getting ready to retire. You're planning ahead. You're saying, okay, I built this nest egg up over, and I've been working for GM for 40 years now. I built this 401k up or 403b, whatever retirement account it is. Okay, I need to look at getting using the rule of 100. I'm 65 years old right now. I want to get the majority of this somewhere safe, somewhere where I can guarantee it for income. So ideally, you're going to be in that, I'd say 50 to 70-year-old range. Some people start planning a little bit earlier, or some people are just more conservative. Some people just don't want to leave their money in the market for the remaining 15, 20 years they're working. So they'll look at moving some earlier as opposed to later. But by definition, retirement age by the IRS is 59 and a half. So technically, if you put money in to an annuity, and the same applies to your retirement account, your 401k, whatever it is, if you try to pull money out before then there is an additional 10% penalty on top of paying taxes. So if it's money that you need to access or you're going to need access to, probably best to wait until after 59 and a half. But if you're just looking to save, that nest egg, and maybe you want to move earlier than 59 and a half, you can do that. But that's also where, if you're still working at your job, sometimes you can't move your 401k yet. Sometimes there are restrictions, but that's based on your specific plan. So
Right.
ideally, you're going to be close to or at retirement age. And there's a lot of other situations. I just had somebody write an annuity in California today for their grandkid who's special needs, where a trust is the owner. So there are very specific situations where you will have even a minor
Right.
as an owner or an annuitant on an annuity contract. That's more of a one-off, but typically you're going to be, approaching or close to that age where you're retiring, or you're 50 plus and you're saying, hey, I want to, using the rule of 100, I don't want all my money exposed anymore. I would like to get it somewhere where I get a more consistent and safer return and it's not at risk. So
Right.
if you would ask, I typically say 50 plus, but there's going to be some situations where maybe people hear this and they realize, like, hey, I'm in my 40s right now, but I've got an old 401k at an old job that I'm not doing anything with. I can't really access it. I can't add to it. A lot of people will, you know, maybe you've got a new 401k at your new job, take that old one and move it somewhere safe while you're still
Yep.
investing the rest of your money in the market. So I would say, outside of specific situations, there really isn't a need for a 20 or 30-year-old, or if you still plan on working for 20 years, probably not a need for a young 40, somebody in their early 40s to purchase one. But I would say once you start to approach 50 and anytime beyond that, if you're investing and you've got a nest egg in a retirement account, That's when you need to start having those conversations and really thinking about, okay, how aggressive or how conservative do I want to be? And am I okay with just leaving my entire nest egg in the market and, potentially having a market collapse?
Right. Yep.
And again, how long do you plan on, that's my thing, is how much longer do you plan on working? Because if you're 70 and you're going to work, you don't want to work for 20 more years, then you really shouldn't be leaving it all at risk. So that's the other part of it, is what are your plans, and how much longer do you want to work for?
Right. So, you had mentioned lifetime income. And when I first started learning about annuities, I knew about the tax benefits and um, the safer earnings, but one of the things that's always intrigued me is, I mean, the whole point of an annuity originally was so you could annuitize that
Yeah.
money, right? And therefore, now all of a sudden, at our, we'll use our 70-year-old gentleman can take his 100,000 and turn that into, you know, uh, $5,000-$10,000 a year for the rest of his life, whatever that breaks
Right.
down to, based
Yep.
on the chart. Well, um, but there's, that's pretty big, and now, granted, as we've talked about, I kind of live in a small town in small town Kansas, but that's something I don't see a lot of people taking advantage of, and in my opinion, as times get tougher, I think we're going to see a lot more people utilizing that, because Social Security quite often doesn't pay the bills by itself.
Yep. And at some point, there's going to be a bubble with that too, where it may not, I don't know if it's going to hit my generation or which generation it's really going to hit, but how long is it actually going to be there for? We really,
Right.
really don't know, and there's no real way to indicate exactly, because the government's not going to come out and say, it'll be gone at this point. So, it's,
Right.
but that is a great point though. And that kind of goes back to how much longer would you like to work for? And that's the
Yep.
biggest concern with that is, okay, once I retire, where am I going to get my income from? And typically the main thing is Social Security, but say you have a decent sized house, you got grandkids, you have all these other miscellaneous expenses. There really isn't anything else out there on the market that provides you guaranteed lifetime income.
Right.
And again, it's another one of those things that it can be sold incorrectly, and I think that can put a sour taste in some people's mouth when it comes to lifetime income. But if you use it the right way and you actually use it, that's the main thing. You use that rider and you take that income. Say you put 100,000 in, and use your example, you get 5,000 per year, start taking income at 70, you're 95 now. You're more than likely going to have drained all of your funds to zero. And that's the
Right.
benefit to the lifetime income, is even after you've used up all your money, the insurance company will continue to send out that paycheck to you monthly, annually, however you set it up, because you can set it up, again,
Mhm.
monthly or
Yep.
annually. But that will continue even after you've used up all the money. So that's the biggest
Right.
benefit.
So we talked about our money being outside the market, but as I've sold annuities, that doesn't necessarily mean we can't take advantage of what the market is doing, right?
Yeah.
Because we have different indexing strategies within a lot of these deals. And for the most part, and you and I have talked about this pretty extensively, for the most part, we do want to stay in lockstep with what the S&P is doing,
Yep.
not mainly because traditionally the S&P has outperformed pretty much any other index that we've come up with, right? Like
Right.
it's not in and of itself, it's not some magic formula, but it's been well balanced, and we keep trying to come back to find something better. And so far, consistently, I haven't found a investment strategy better in most of these, right? I mean, does that jive with what you've seen as well?
Absolutely. And I don't remember the exact figures, but whether it's an annuity or you're just going to your financial advisor and he's investing your money, both are going to trail the S&P. The S&P is typically going to outperform by a pretty good margin any financial advisor's investments, or again annuities for that matter. And I mean that's really why it's pretty much the benchmark for how the stock market's doing. If you're ever wondering how the stock market's doing, you pull up the S&P, and of course it's not going to be right in line with everything that's happening, but it'll give you by far the best idea as to whether things are up, things are down right now. It's been a really volatile day. It's typically what people turn to when they're just trying to get an idea of how things are going in the market. And most of these products that's the reason most of these products include the S&P 500 on the different strategies that you can select from. And each product has their own rates and own features on there, but that's typically what I look to, and what a lot of advisors have gone back to is exactly what you said, utilizing the S&P 500. So we know for a fact where market's up, your product or your returns are going to reflect that. Right. Whereas when you're buying individual stocks or even buying some of these other, random indexes that have been created, because there's thousands of them out there now, you can't even keep up with them. And they don't always mirror what the market's doing. So that is actually a really good point when you're looking at annuities or just looking at investments in general. You do want to get into something that to some degree has trailed with what the S&P is doing. You don't want to be down market's up, and that's where a lot of people are
at. And speaking of which, and now I did come across, matter of fact, and you were the one that introduced me to it, a new type, I guess, of strategy, for lack of a better term, the one we were talking about today, where with what is it, levers?
Triggers, yeah.
Trigger, rather, yeah. So tell me about how that works.
So it is, like you said, it's a newer strategy that insurance companies have come up with, but the idea behind a trigger is, and this is where that term fixed comes into play again. They're going to offer you a fixed trigger or a fixed rate on your contract, and we'll just, to make the math easy, say that trigger is 5, which would be that would be a lower trigger, but just to make the numbers easy, we'll use 5. And the idea behind the trigger is all that index, and that's, I don't really know if we need to dive into what an index is, but just we'll use the S&P for this example. The S&P 500, all the S&P needs to do is be up 0.01%, and you will get that 5% credit. Now, again, just playing devil's advocate, to be fair, the downside of that, could you do better somewhere else? Could you do better than 5? Sure, you could. But with all the volatility in today's market, especially lately, just everything going on right now, that becomes a really attractive strategy, where if the market is just, it's so up and down that we don't really make it doesn't have enough time to jump, you don't need that huge boost in that index to get that full credit. So it's a way for you to get a good credit, again, in this example, 5, without the index having to perform that.
Right. And, speaking of volatility, and one of the things that I used for several of my clients, and especially at the end of last year, was the multi-year guaranteed annuity, right? Where they had a fixed percent, a fixed rate, Um, and what we're seeing is a lot of them, pretty good amount over 5% for just 3 years. And I kind of liken these to a long term CD, um, just for ease of conversation and explanation. These, what, 2.5, 3 years ago, honestly kind of sucked for interest rates,
Oh,
right?
they
I
did.
was seeing
they,
two and a
were-
half
they didn't look that.
percent.
Yeah, they didn't look that good some years
I
ago,
mean,
but
they they were better than a CD at the time,
exactly. Yeah,
most of the time, but ouch.
yeah. 2.5
And
does.
then
Right.
and then we started taking a beating in the stock market, and inflation started taking off like it does.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I started seeing 505 and 51, and I think the highest I saw was what, about a 5.6, 5.65, somewhere in there on a 3 year. Might have got up to about 5.75, but we were flirting with six, and right now we're still right around that 5.5%. So for somebody that just wanted, you know,
A,
absolute security,
a bank CD, and again, it's like you said, it's not the exact same. It's a different structure, different taxation, so they are different products. But that is by far the easiest way to explain it. You walk into a bank, say, "Hey, I want to get a CD." They'll tell you you'll get this rate for this amount of time.
yep,
And typically, you'll see banks, just the way they're structured and how they do their own investments, they'll be much more aggressive on really, really short term, 6 to 12
yep,
month. That's where
hmm
banks are competitive, or credit unions for that matter. Whereas with the annuities, you really don't find any 1 or 2 year contracts because the way they price their products and the way they, invest their own money, they're going to be a lot more aggressive on the really 2 to 5 year chassis. That's
yep,
where you're going to have the really good annuity rates. But it's exactly what you said. It's if you want a 3 year annuity and the rate is 5.5, that's exactly what you're going to get every single year. Doesn't matter what the market does. Doesn't matter what the S&P does. Doesn't matter. Say that company decides to drop rates a year from them on all their new money. Your contract isn't changed. So that is a way to lock in a guaranteed rate. You just again, it doesn't matter what is going on in the world. You know exactly what you're going to get, and it can be a way to generate some supplemental income without having to dip into your principal. So that's where a lot of
absolutely.
people will use the MIGAs is where you can't really do that with the CD. You can't just pull the money out every month. With an annuity, you can set it up to where you put X amount in. It's going to get you X amount interest per year, and they'll send you a check every month, or again
Yep.
once a year, however you set it up. But that's really where those come in handy. Again, it's just retirement planning, income. What am I going to do once I retire? And I don't no longer have an income from my job. It's just another way to again create some extra income using annuities.
Right. And we're talking about retirement planning. Well, more and more folks are starting to need like assisted living, or more importantly, what we refer to as long-term care, right? I mean, none of us wants to think about going into a nursing home, but it's kind of like, when's the best time to plant a forest? Well, 30 years ago, but
Right.
today, if you haven't, right?
Yep.
Um, so I've noticed that many of these have the option for like a long-term care or a disability type rider. You care to explain a little bit more about how those work?
Yep. So a lot of times it's again, this is just me getting probably being a little too in the weeds, but most of them are waivers as opposed to riders. A rider is typically a
Sure.
feature that you add to your contract, and there's usually some, whether it's a fee or lower rates, there's usually some cost associated with that.
Hmm.
Whereas a waiver, it's just a feature in your contract. It's just
Fair.
not really optional. It's just there. They included it. So most of them, and that's again, all of them have their own maybe age limits or, just different. ways that they'll word it in the contract. But most are going to have a nursing home waiver to where if you end up, say you purchased this annuity 5 years ago, now you're going into a nursing home. If you're confined for 90 days, most of these will allow you to just access your full account value without a penalty. And that's how most of those nursing home waivers work. Now, there are products where you can add additional benefits with riders and maybe double your income or whatever, that specific feature adds. But that's a really important feature for people, especially if you have, your grandma who's 75, she's got this money just sitting in her bank account. She's not in a nursing home now, but you can see maybe the health is starting to deteriorate pretty quickly. So is it a good idea to buy this annuity? What if we need the money? Well, in that situation, if she ends up in a nursing home, she can access, the 105,000 she has in there without a penalty.
Right.
And it's different from a return of premium. It's not just going to give you your 100,000 back. If your 100 grew to 110,000, she'll be able to access the 110,000. And the same applies for most will have a terminal illness rider as well, or waiver, where if a physician tells you like, hey, you've got X amount of days to live, worst case scenario, you got cancer, whatever the situation is, same situation, they'll let you pull your account value out penalty free. But that is an important question to ask when looking at purchasing an annuity, especially if it's, for someone who's a little bit older. Like, hey, does this have any way for me to access my money in a situation where I need it for long-term care purposes?
Right. Absolutely. Well, and so as I know you're aware, I sell Medicare and things like that,
Yep.
and I looked into long-term care policies in and of themselves, and that's the kind of policy, if you're going to buy that policy, you want to buy it even closer probably to your age than mine,
Yep.
honestly, for it to be affordable.
Absolutely.
I'm almost 50 and they're starting to get kind of pricey. If you wait till you're 65, 70, I mean,
Yeah,
you're looking at a whole lot every month out of pocket. Whereas if you were to just buy your annuity, and invest responsibly, right?
right.
And then because we hope we never need it, right? I mean, that's like the whole purpose of insurance, have it and hope you don't need it. And that's the best part about these long-term care and end of life waivers is, guess what? If you don't need it, great.
You
You
didn't pay
still have
for it.
all the other benefits of that annuity.
Exactly.
Whereas if you buy a long-term care policy and you're spending $6,000 a month, granted, that's still better than the $10,000, $15,000 you'll pay a month for the facility. But now you pay it from the time you're 60 to the time you're 75, and you've just spent a whole lot of money and got nothing for it.
Yep. It's use it or lose it. Most of the long-term care products are use it or lose it products. Again, it's like you said, it's great to have. You definitely want to have something set up, but that's why we've seen people and even advisors and agents move away from traditional long-term care, just because if you don't buy it early enough, it is likely going to be out of your price range when you're now probably retired or getting ready to retire and working on fixed income.
Right. Absolutely. I actually might have to sit down and do the math on what the break-even point is on that.
Yeah, no, it's
But I can't,
been more and more expensive too for those.
I can't bring myself to sell LTC by itself.
I really don't know anybody that does anymore. I'm sure there's still people out there that specialize in it, but normally nowadays people will go with something more like an annuity. And the other part is you don't have as much of the health underwriting that comes with a long-term care product.
Exactly. Because really the only other thing that comes to mind that you can use similarly is like an IUL.
Yep.
A lot of those have similar benefits, and that'll be something I'll be talking about uh, here for our viewers and listeners before too long. But those you absolutely do have underwriting with.
Yep.
So if you're already starting to have some health problems, if you're diabetic, like way too many people in the United States, myself included, um, it's gonna get pricier.
Yep.
So yeah. Anything else that you want to talk about, Noah, as far as annuities and uses and all that fun stuff?
I think we did a really good job covering pretty much most of the basics, but I would say the number one thing people need to keep in mind is ask questions. There are no stupid questions when it comes to investments in annuities, because unless you're working in the space and you're like me where you're just forced to talk about it every day,
Right.
there's no reason for you to know the verbiage and the terminology. And I think that can scare people away sometimes. It sounds like a really complicated product when once you understand the verbiage and okay, this means this and this means this, you realize it's really not that complicating of a product. It's just understanding what all the terms mean. So
Right.
I would definitely say make sure you ask questions, do your own research, but don't shy away from it because you don't know what it is, or maybe somebody else told you they had a bad experience. Again, that is one of the most common misconceptions, is when people are typically unhappy or they lost money or they paid way too much in fees, that's usually going to apply specifically to variable annuities. And it's 9 times out of 10, that's going to be the case. They bought a
Mm-hmm.
variable annuity from their advisor. Maybe the return wasn't the greatest. Maybe the market was down and they lost money. On top of that, you're going to be paying, whether it's a death benefit fee or an income fee, usually around 1 or 2%. On top of that, you got M&E and A fees. That's going to bump that up to 3 to 4% on the lower end. That does not
Yeah.
apply to the fixed annuity. So just making sure
Right.
people understand that there is a huge difference between buying a variable annuity or buying something fixed. And those are
Absolutely.
typically the two main words to look out for. If somebody's trying to sell you an annuity, or you're just doing your own research, just making sure you understand which type it is and which each type is going to be good for.